Hi, and welcome to the PROUST Questionnaire. My co-host Caroline and I are thrilled to host the author and playwright Daniel Kehlmann today. He's based in Berlin and New York, originally from Vienna, and is the author of the novel Measuring the World, which became a global bestseller several years ago. It's been translated into over 30 languages, and it's an amazing book that will draw you in from page one. In addition to many other books and plays, he's most recently published Till, which was shortlisted for the Booker Prize in 2020, and is a book set in the 30 Years' War in Europe. It's an equally absorbing and incredible tale that Daniel has crafted into something that will just not let you go. It's also coming to a screen near you because Till is being turned into a Netflix series that will be released in 2021. Which reminds us, both Carolyn and I wish you all the best for the new year. And let's close out 2020 with this exciting episode with Daniel Kehlmann. You can also find us on Instagram, and please do so to learn about new episodes and additional projects we're working on. Caroline is Caroline Weber 2020. I am uli.baer, and the podcast is found at PROUST.questionnaire on Instagram. We have a YouTube channel, Ulrich Baer, and the website for the podcast is called PROUSTquestionnaire.net. We hope you'll enjoy this episode with the writer Daniel Kehlmann. Welcome to the PROUST Questionnaire.
35 questions giving us insight into what makes creative people tick.
Hi, Daniel. Welcome to the PROUST Questionnaire. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure and an honor.
We're thrilled that you could make it all the way from Montauk.
All the way from Montauk, right? Electronically. It's actually easy, but it's still, all the way.
I've known you now for many years, and we've actually done events together and talked about a lot of different books. Caroline has read the book Measuring the World that a lot of people who are listening probably have read. To me, it's actually really nice that I read it a long time ago, long before I knew you, and you have 7 other novels, a lot of plays, different essays. My 18-year-old niece and my mother, who's 88, both are a little bit in awe that I actually know you, even. And which is really wonderful. And they're very different people, and it's not they all study literature or something, but my 18-year-old niece could not believe that I knew you as a person because it was the one book in her entire high school career that she truly loved. So it's really nice that a book that Caroline connected to, I connected to, so many people connected to around the world, and now you are at the end of the geographic territorial United States, the eastern tip of Long Island. But it's really wonderful to have you on the podcast today.
It makes me very happy what you just said about your niece and your mother. That's just it's been a while now that I wrote this book, and it has become kind of it's by now I feel like it's something that has disconnected from me in a way, because just so many people know it and react to it and talk about it, but it's just very, very beautiful for me. It's something that makes me happy that this book is out there and people really connect to it. I think that's what you really want as a writer, and just to have had that once in your life at one point already means that you can be happy as a writer, and you fulfilled what you once wanted to do.
But it's right, it's nice. The experience that they shared with me was this profound happiness at reading such a great book. They actually they did exactly that. They said they loved reading this book, and both of them said, my mother and my niece said, oh my God, we wanted to make it very slow so it wouldn't end. It's such a great book. So that kind of experience, I think, and that you give people a space and a time to share, and you don't know who these people are anymore because there's many millions who are reading this book.
Yeah, but of course they are. Then I do meet people who tell me that they connected to it very strongly, or I meet or I hear it from people like you, who know people who connect, who had a strong connection to the book. And yeah, I feel it's one of the great joys of my life to have a book that achieved this. And it's not it doesn't necessarily mean it's my best book. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the most important thing I wrote. It might, but I don't know. I'm trying not to think about that. But in many ways, it just means like in this one case, I really achieved one of the things that you dream of when you start out as a young writer, like to connect, to make a connection.
Yeah. And we'll be sure to put on the podcast and on social media your most recent book called Till, is a kind of composite figure about in the 30 Years War, which I find equally compelling. And it just came out in America right before the shutdown. So we'll do our part as much as we can to get people to pay attention to this most recent novel you published.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it came out before the shutdown. I was quite lucky with the timing, so it was still reviewed before the newspapers started only writing about Corona. So and it sold quite well when there were still bookstores. So I was very lucky. It could have just disappeared, of course, 4 weeks later, and it would have just been like a virtual book launch.
Yeah.
That didn't happen.
Well, we're happy to have you virtually now. And we'll go through the original 35 questions from the PROUST questionnaire, which dates back to the 1890s. And the order can be a little bit interesting. So bear with us, please. And we'll start out with an easy question. What is your idea of perfect happiness?
When writing goes well. That's easy. When writing goes well.
Yeah.
Should I elaborate, or is that all you need?
Oh, well, I mean, you don't always have to elaborate, but because we're both writers too, I think I'd love to hear more about what that means to you, just when it's flowing of its own.
Yeah, it's usually when you reach the last third or the last quarter in a novel you're working on. And when all the important decisions have been made, and when it's going really well, meaning like you will finish this book, this is going where it's supposed to go. And then when you just work every day and you get a little bit further in the book, and you feel nothing really serious, I mean, short of course lightning striking you or some other accident, but in as far as the writing is concerned, nothing really serious can happen now to make this book not to prevent this book from being finished. So so that's the best and most beautiful. That's the idea of perfect happiness. Those months of writing when it goes well.
Yeah.
Daniel, what is your greatest fear?
Well, since I would have had a lot of more philosophical answers to that, but I have an 11-year-old, so it's very easy. The idea that anything bad could happen to my son.
What is the trait you most deplore in others?
Meanness. Meanness, yeah.
As in unkindness, pettiness, both of the above?
As in, well, there are many reasons why someone could be unkind. People can also just be unkind because they're selfish, which is also not great. But there is also something like sadism, where people are unkind to really hurt others because because that's what gives them joy. That's actually quite rare. It doesn't happen a lot. I once interviewed Tom Bergenthal, who was an Auschwitz survivor, and he said, actually, even under the worst circumstances, there are very few people who actually enjoy hurting others. Most are just opportunists. They think they have been ordered to do this, whatever. But some people enjoy it, and that's evil. That's the worst.
Yeah. What is the trait you most deplore in yourself?
Oh, there's so many. I would say a certain laziness in all aspects. Laziness to work, laziness to think something through, also emotional laziness sometimes to go for the easiest emotion towards something that's happening. Like sometimes outrage is just the easiest way to react, or sometimes sometimes just being angry instead of asking why is someone doing something, or so yeah, any kind of laziness. That's the trait in myself I really don't like.
It's an unexpected answer from someone who's published, I don't know, these 12 books, several
I know.
plays, a screenplay, and Netflix series. Okay, but I'm just going to move on. Which living person do you most admire?
Which what person? Sorry.
Which living person do you most admire?
Oh, which living person? That's not easy. I for whatever reason, right? For whatever reason.
Yeah.
I would say Mario Vargas Llosa as a writer.
Okay.
And well, I now have to add someone as a moral character and as a moral as a great moral example. And of course, there are so many, but right now I feel like, so maybe that's again laziness. I can't think of anyone of anyone who really comes to mind with very strong force. And okay, I'll just leave it to that. I just leave it with that. I will say Mario Vargas Llosa, but not for his politics.
Okay. What is your greatest extravagance?
My greatest extravagance, I am quite ashamed, but I feel I don't have any.
Okay.
Which is not something I'm proud of.
Why would you be ashamed of often we have people who apologize to us or say that they're ashamed because of their extravagances.
No, I think it's good to have some extravagance. It sounds really boring if you don't have that.
Yes. Yeah, it's true. Most people probably name the things they really like.
Yeah.
Extravagant is they think they really like to indulge in. That's true. They may feel guilty, but they still like it. That's true.
Yeah, I really feel I don't have any real extravaganza. I'm kind of mortified by realizing that, but it might be true.
So we didn't believe that you're necessarily lazy, but maybe you're lazy about finding extravagances then. I don't know. So nothing feels like an indulgence to you in your life.
There are a lot of small indulgences, of course, but they're really boring for a conversation like this. Like I eat too many carbs, for example. I know we're not supposed to eat carbs anymore, but I eat carbs all the time. But what kind of an answer is that? So
maybe a universal answer. What is your current state of mind?
My current state of mind is I was extremely worried, like worried to the brink of panicking a month ago still. And now I have calmed down, and because I can see that there might be a future, not just might be, that there is opening up a future after the pandemic. So my state of mind is, I wouldn't say optimistic, because I still think the outcome of all this will be very dark and in the long run, but also I think it's still I'm pessimistic but not panicking anymore, and therefore comparatively calm now compared to my state of mind a month ago.
Okay.
Yeah. What do you consider the most overrated virtue?
The most overrated virtue, that would be modesty. It comes too easy.
On what occasion do you lie?
I could say on questionnaires like this a lot, but that would just be for the sake of the joke. So I would say on all kinds of social occasions to get through some kind of small talk conversation. and then also, that's one answer, and the other would also be talk when there's any, when talking to older fellow writers or artists pretending to know their work really well. Because you have to do that in some cases, otherwise any conversation is impossible.
Oh no. Oh yeah, but you're right, that does seem politic, at least if the assumption is that you know all about their work.
If there's, I'm not going to say any names, but there are some, as I said, older colleagues, and not just, as again, not just writers, all kind of artists. If you want to get through a conversation without them getting angry, you will have to, in some way, pretend to be really familiar with their work.
What do you most dislike about your appearance?
About my appearance?
Yes.
My teeth sometimes. I mean,
okay.
I mean, I had an overbite when I was a child. Is that what you call it in English? Yeah,
Yes.
and it was treated, but it was not treated as well as now. I would think I would like it to have been treated for a few months longer, so it hasn't completely disappeared. And even though it might not be very obvious to everyone all the time, it's some of the things I feel very self-conscious about. I think it's one of those normal things, a tiny thing in yourself that you can never get out of your mind. So that would be that for me.
Yeah, sure.
Which living person do you most despise?
I really think I have to say Mitch McConnell.
Mm.
I'm not Donald Trump, but Mitch McConnell. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
He's
For obvious reasons.
Come up a few times on this questionnaire.
Did he? Oh, that's great. I like to hear that.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Yeah. What is the quality you most like in a man?
Yeah, I actually, I know that's in the PROUST questionnaire, and I think there's also going to be what do you most like in a woman, right. And I really feel like that's one of the few parts where that questionnaire feels a bit dated, because I really, not to give you a politically correct answer, but I really cannot think of any quality where I feel like that's a quality I want to see in men, or that's a quality I want to see in women. I think that there's the gender distinction doesn't make any difference here. I really so I can't give you a male specific answer to that.
Sure. Yeah, no, Uli and I, when we first started doing this questionnaire, would often almost apologize in advance for the datedness of the question, but we decided to keep it as is. And sometimes people give gendered answers, but you're, as with Mitch McConnell, I think you're not alone. In objecting.
I wouldn't mind a gendered answer if I could think of one, but I honestly can't.
Of course. No, well, can you, what is the quality then that you most like in a human being?
Definitely empathy. I think I agree with Schopenhauer when he says that love is at its core the ability to show empathy, and I think there's nothing more important. And I also think that empathy is the greatest miracle of the human soul. Why we are able to feel that in the first place? Why we are not? How are we not complete egotists? But we aren't. And yeah, it's definitely for me the most important quality and the most miraculous quality in any human being.
I wonder if Schopenhauer gets this in Rousseau.
Yeah.
It's one of the two qualities that kind of moderate or modify us. Otherwise, we would be selfish brutes, like kind of straight out of Hobbes. But for Rousseau, the fact that we do not like to see others suffer makes us actually connected to them and takes us out of ourselves. It's interesting that it becomes, in Schopenhauer's philosophical, but it becomes a prerequisite for political life.
Yeah, and I think that's true. Even politics would be completely different if we would really be incapable of empathy. But it's really kind of mysterious why we are able to empathize in the first place. It's not a given at all.
Yeah. And do you feel like it's a prerequisite for the literary life? I mean, is
Yes.
empathy a quality in you that
it's definitely
produces, I mean, what you do?
Definitely. I think if you subtract empathy from literature, there's only the ego, only egotism remains, and actually that can still work for a poet. I'm not making fun of that. I'm very serious. You can still be only interested in yourself and write great poems, but you cannot be only interested in yourself and write good novels. That is just impossible, because novels are emphatically about other people, and even if they have a strong first person voice or character, there have to be, I mean, there are very few experimental novels like the Baer trilogy, where you really have one solipsistic person in the center, and you don't really get from that person to other people. But the example of that are very few. So you actually need empathy to write novels. It's in a way, it has been said that novels are the exercise of seeing the world through the eyes of other people. So they're actually not even, you don't need just empathy to write a novel. A novel is also a school of empathy for every reader.
Yeah, that's become one of the, I think it's become an element of the argument that people in ULIs in my profession, people who teach literature for a living, have tried to advance when presented with the sort of disdainful question, well, in the age of technology and engineering and digital everything, what use is it to study literature? And I think you're right, that to describe literature as a school for empathy is one of the best answers we can give. Uli, what do you think?
We would have to have a second interview about this. Okay. I am not convinced that it would be it could be a school. Let me use the metaphor. Not everybody's going to get the message. So in some ways, it doesn't make somebody develop empathy necessarily to read a novel. I think so that will be more complicated. I think it is nothing automatic. You can follow lots of novels or films and remain a completely unempathic person, because if you're not shifted from the position of the observer, bystander, into someone involved, kind of a witnessing position, which good literature can do. But I think you can also just read a book and feel detached from these people and see their suffering and not connect.
That's true, but you can always, so to speak, go to school and not learn anything. I mean,
that's kind of what I'm saying.
Possible, yeah. No, I agree with that.
Not just in literature.
Exactly. So like you can read a lot of novels and not get them in a way.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Right.
Which words or phrases do you most overuse?
Well, in English, because I learned colloquial English in America, so I sometimes overuse those American terms like awesome, amazing, which I learned to use a lot when I came to America. I didn't use them at all before. So I definitely overuse that in English to kind of adapt to the speech patterns around me, but then I over adapt. In German, something that you're not supposed to use, I think, at all, it would be those vague terms like irgendwie. Somehow it was somehow like that. It comes more naturally in German, and it's always something where I feel like, as a writer, I'm not supposed to use that. I have to try to, even when I talk, to be as specific as possible and not go for those phrases of vagueness.
Yeah. As a writer, I don't want to hear from the writer I'm reading irgendwie. I want to hear how.
Yeah, exactly.
No, yeah.
And by the way, also that, and it might not be to your point to your question at all, but when I text, I don't use emojis because I feel like as a writer, I'm not supposed to. As a writer, I'm supposed to actually put in words what I want to say. I don't mind if other people do it, but I feel like as a writer, you should.
Fair enough. Yeah, I once sent my editor an email that was full of emojis at the end, and then I wrote an apologetic PS saying, I guess as a writer, I'm not supposed to use emojis. I did the shrug emoji, and I was really hoping she would write back with an emoji, and of course she wrote back with the word exactly.
Oh, that's tough. Oh my God.
But she was right. So just to say, yes, your policy seems to me like the correct one, even if I can't observe it. What or who is the greatest love of your life?
My wife, of course, and my son.
Yes.
It's not a very original answer, but I really don't have a better one.
It's quite original since they're your wife and your son.
Yeah, that's true.
Nobody else's. So that in
Right.
they're singular, not original. When and where were you happiest?
I think, looking back now, actually, when I was on a writing fellowship on the island of Sylt in early spring, I think, of 2004. No, it was late summer of 2004. And that brings us back to what we talked about before, writing the last 50 pages of Measuring the World. Not being able to sleep at night because I had so many little ideas which I felt like I had to switch on the light again, write them down. And I felt like this very funny book that it felt like to me like I was writing a really funny book. So that makes you more happy than writing a dark book like Till, for example. Yeah. And that all was coming together, and it happened, and it was spring, and I was on that island, and I was really completely alone most of the time, which was also great.
Nice. Which talent would you most like to have?
I would love to be able to play the piano really well. That would be beautiful.
Okay, how well? Can you start now and get to that level?
Yeah, but I would have to have a natural gift and then also learn it with a lot of dedication for a really long time, which I'm not able to because of laziness, which you mentioned. And so that's not going to happen in this lifetime. And I did learn the piano as a child for many years, and I was really, really not gifted at all. So I never liked to practice, and it went nowhere. And yeah, and so I don't have regrets. I don't feel like I should have practiced more because I was not talented. But that's something I would love to be able to really play the piano beautifully.
Which one is the Thomas Bernhard novel about the piano prodigy who realizes he's not quite good enough to make?
Oh yeah, that's the Untergeher.
Yeah, I can't remember what it's called in English, but he's realizing he's not going to be as good as the other one.
Glenn Gould, yes, because Glenn Gould is going to school together with him.
The genius, no? Is it the loser, the genius?
Yeah, but he's not quite a loser. It's just he's not as good as Glenn Gould, whereas I really was a loser. I'm not saying I was Glenn Gould. There's a big difference between that.
But I think you're right. It is called The Loser in English.
Is it? It is? Okay, yeah.
In German, I think it should be called something like A Man in Decline or something like that. Or, but it's quite interesting about somebody who has a standard that is so incredible. And how do you live your life with this knowledge that you're not going to be that?
I mean, my father in 1946 or 7, he was a young actor at Burgtheater in Vienna. And there was one other actor who started with him the same month. There was a young man called Oskar Werner. And so my father was in that position. So he was on stage with this guy who was the same age and who turned out to be one of the greatest actors of the century. And then my father just quit acting. So
that's both very helpful and very depressing.
Yes.
Yeah. It's funny, I was thinking about Bernhard when you were talking about the rare novel that doesn't ask you to have empathy for
Mhm.
other characters, although I guess you enter it, one reading Bernhardt, one enters into an identification of some kind with that monomaniacal
Yeah, but
first
it is also an
person.
objection. I was never a huge fan of his novels. I've said
Yeah.
that publicly, so it's not a
Happiest.
big reveal. But I was never a huge fan of his novels for that very reason. And I think that some of the novelists who learned a lot from Bernhard, like very different novelists, like Imre Kertész on one hand or Javier Marias on the other, I prefer them to Bernhard for that very reason. There's
Yeah.
much less of that monomaniac one person viewpoint and more of other people.
Yeah.
And variation.
If you could change one thing about yourself, what would it be?
It would I would like to be less anxious about many things, less nervous and less anxious. I mean, I'm a terrible traveler. I can't sleep if I have to go on a long trip because I think I'll miss my plane, and I'm terribly at organizing because I have no confidence. I get always angry and nervous and anxious. So that stuff. So I would like to be less anxious about things to organize, about small everyday stuff of life.
Yeah. Has the pandemic lockdown mitigated some of that low grade anxiety for you, even as it sort of ignited, as you said a month ago, a real panic about the future?
It was actually great not to have to travel. So it was so I learned about myself because of course I've been traveling all the time the last, I don't know, 15 years. And I've always told everyone I'm unhappy about this, I don't want to travel. And then of course secretly you have the suspicion about yourself that maybe I would be unhappy if I couldn't travel. Maybe I'm wrong about this. And now I learn, no, it's really great for me not to travel. I get more work done. It makes me calm. It makes me more focused. It is a much better life for me if I don't travel. So I in that way, it has definitely mitigated some of that.
Well, it's unfortunate that it gets replaced with a huge existential dread.
Yeah. And then also the very, I mean, maybe that's a different question, but then also the very, the lockdown wasn't so severe over in America, which I think is a good thing actually, because I think what they did in some countries is was just insanely strict. Like the level of lockdown they had in Spain, where they didn't allow children to go out for whatever reason other than go to a hospital, and they locked in a whole generation of children for 2 months in their apartments, often very small apartments in a very hot country also. So that filled me with a lot of anxiety, the idea that our government, and I'm not talking about the terrible Trump government, that's a different story, but I meant the good liberal Western democratic governments in Europe, which we all really like in so many ways, that they can overreact like that, and that it can be so, that they actually can do that without any significant resistance. The resistance comes now when it's over, which is also crazy, but that filled me with a lot of anxiety, I have to say. Like I felt more than the actual virus. And I'm not saying, you have to get me right, I'm not saying that lockdowns were uncalled for or that the virus is not a terrible threat, but still I feel like the amount of the lockdown in Spain and France had no scientific basis, and there was not even a debate about that, and that made me lose a lot of trust in the basic idea that in our liberal democracy I'm safe from government overreach.
Delia, what do you consider your greatest achievement?
Having written books at all. I mean, and having written novels at all. It is so extremely difficult to write a novel, and there are so many obstacles, and it is so crazy hard to make all the elements work together. And there are always so many reasons why it doesn't work, that to actually make it work, and I'm not talking about then make it whether the book is good or bad, but to make it work at all, to finish this, to get through it all the way to the end, I'm really proud of that. And not about the quality. It's really about the fact that I did that and hoped, and every single time I feel like I might never be able to do it again, ever. And that's how I feel right now again. So yeah.
And is that a different feeling, since you're also a playwright? Does writing a play not induce that same level of doubt as to whether you'll be able to get to the end?
Yeah. No, yeah, it doesn't, because it's so much shorter. It's so much shorter. So it's actually less. A novel is many years of work. A play usually isn't. A play is just a month of work, or a few months maybe, but you can actually write a play if you really put your mind on it. You can also do it in a few days. So yeah, this feeling that you have to not just like Thomas Mann has this phrase at some point in one of his short stories, drink an ocean, about like that you have to drink an ocean, like that. Only a novel has that.
That's great. Well, and he definitely, some of those books are oceans too.
Yeah.
So,
Oh my God, definitely.
good Lord. If you were to die and come back as another person or a thing, who or what would it be?
Who or what would it be? I would like to be, well, if it has to be an animal, I would like to be a bird, just to once experience what flying feels like. And if it has to be a human being, I would like to be a great painter. Because I have no talent for it whatsoever. And I feel like it must be great. And then also seeing what the art world looks like, you make so much more money. So that's also not, that would also be on my mind for that decision.
If you're a great painter, yes. Some people make the money. That's true.
Yeah, I would choose to be one of those if I have the choice.
Right, since we're giving you the choice.
Yeah, right.
Why not?
Yeah.
Why not start at the top?
Where would you most like to live?
Yeah, I haven't figured that out. I'm afraid I can't really answer that. I'm still thinking about that, and I feel like I have a different answer to that every time of the day or whatever happens. So for a long time there was New York City. In many ways it's still New York City, but then often, especially when I'm in New York City, I feel like I would love to be in a house on a mountaintop in Switzerland. And then when I am in a house on a mountaintop in Switzerland, I just want to be in Berlin. So it's always somewhere else. And I guess that would be the only constant answer to that, somewhere else.
What is your most treasured possession?
My most treasured possession, now that will sound a bit corny coming from a writer, but it is actually my Mont Blanc pen, which I've been using, one of those Meisterstück pens by Mont Blanc, which I've been using I've been using since I was 16. So I've always been writing in longhand and always with the same pen. So there's not just a great sentimental value for me connected to that pen, also because I've always used it. It has kind of now it has the perfect angle. It has been like become like a part of my hand, because if you use one of those gold pens, the way you golden tip pens, the way you hold it actually means that the pen itself adapts to your style of writing, to the way how you hold it, to the angle you put it on paper. So it is perfectly adapted to my hand, and any other pen feels, compared to that pen, really clumsy. So for sentimental values, but also for the really practical value that having used the same pen for so many years makes it perfectly adapted to your hand, that is my most prized possession.
And it is the one that you've had since you were 16, that very
yes.
pen?
Always the same, yes. Always the same. Never lost it. So I'm really kind of, I'm really paranoid about losing that pen. And it will probably happen at some point in my life. And I'm already dismayed.
how far in the draft do you go in writing by hand? Like how many versions, or to what point?
Usually I write the whole first draft by longhand, and then I type it all. So I don't pay someone else to type it. I type it all myself, which is very important because a lot gets changed. So the typing itself is a very important act of revision. But usually the whole first draft is in longhand.
And do you write on loose leaf paper or on notebooks?
I write on loose leaves of paper, and I discovered this Belgian company. They're not paying me to say that, but since you asked, called Atoma, and they have those blocks where, with a ring system, you can take out leaves, but you can also put them back in. You don't rip them out, but it's a system. You can check it out how it works. It's very simple, but it's also very effective. You can take them out and put them back in, so you can rearrange them. So for the last 2 books, I have used that system, and you can only get them in one store in Berlin. So I'm always really worried that they might stop producing that paper, because I really like to use their paper blocks with that special system.
Yeah. What do you regard as the lowest depth of misery?
The lowest act, or
the lowest depth? I'm sorry, of misery.
The lowest depth of misery. Well, grief, when someone you love dies. I would say, yeah.
What is your favorite occupation?
I guess it would be very easy to say writing, but that's not true. I think I have to say sleeping. I really like to sleep.
Marcel Proust says somewhere, the man who sleeps holds around him in a circle worlds and years. This idea that actually sleeping regenerates the imagination somehow. Is that your experience? You write better when you're well slept? Or?
Yes, definitely. Being well slept makes everything better. And dreaming helps a lot with writing, not because you write what you dream, but because you're somehow more in touch with your inner life of your imagination. And then also just, you feel better when you're well rested. So I've always been a good sleeper. Thank God. I'm really grateful for that. And I just like to sleep. I like to go to bed. I like to fall asleep. I like the whole process of this. I don't feel like I've wasted time when I sleep long.
I think a lot of people do.
Yeah, I know, but I never understood that. I think, what could be better?
What is your most marked characteristic, the trait in you that you think other people notice the most often?
I really don't know, and I don't want to speculate about it, because if it's something good, then it would sound very vain to talk about that, and if it's something bad, then I would get really anxious about this. So I prefer not to speculate about that.
Okay, what do you most value in your friends?
If they're not boring. That's really great privilege to have friends who are not boring.
Right. Who are your favorite writers?
That's of course a big question. I think the writers who have been the most influence on me, among the living, I mentioned him before. There would be Mario Vargas Llosa, and among the writers not alive anymore, I think number 1 would be Vladimir Nabokov, and number 2 would be Garcia Marquez. And and that's just numbering them by their influence on me, because I think Marquez is the even greater writer than Nabokov. But as influences, they have been. And then I think also as an influence, also Thomas Mann. I mean, I read everything he wrote I really read every single thing Thomas Mann wrote in my late teens and early 20s. And now I've kind of moved away from him in many ways, as I have from Nabokov. But as an influence, I can't deny he has been very important.
Who is your hero in fiction or fiction?
You mean as a
An
fictional hero, or
imaginary character in film or books, someone who is invented?
you mean like a preferred hero, like someone I have great sympathy for, or yeah, that would be Pierre in War and Peace by Tolstoy. That's still my favorite hero. I mean, I guess you heard that answer a few times. I would assume. No, you didn't. Oh,
no,
that's surprising.
He's such a great character.
Yeah.
Well, so why, for our readers who maybe haven't, I've been using the lockdown to reread War and Peace for the first time in about 25 years, and he's such an appealing character. But will you say more about him for our listeners who don't remember?
He's so complex and so interesting. He is full of empathy. He is so he's so intellectual in such a beautiful way. He really tries to do the right thing. He is such a sweet and soft person. So he's so, I mean, interesting. I've never thought about that, but Tolstoy is such a great writer because not just does he have so much empathy with his characters, but also his characters usually have so much empathy with other people. So, and Pierre has so much empathy, and you just cannot help loving him. And then something really interesting, which is from today's perspective would be quite a daring thing to do for a fiction writer. He is extremely rich. So he's the hero of the book, and you feel the empathy with him, and he's rambling and trying to do the right thing, and in a way, the fact that he's so rich that you can't even imagine being that rich doesn't in any way get in your way when you feel empathy with him and understand his choices, and that's kind of also very interesting about him as a character, as a choice for a fictional hero.
You're right. Having that kind of wealth in a novel today, he would almost have to be a disagreeable character on some level. It would block, or at least the easy route would be to make that the sort of cause or the manifestation of his lack of empathy. Just somebody who exists for money. I mean, you see that in Balzac. The rich characters are generally not the nice ones.
And with him, it's his money, of course, comes from a system of serfdom, wealth generated by serfdom. So there is something deeply wrong about his wealth, but he knows that, and a big part of the novel is him trying to make up for that in some ways, and so that also becomes part of the moral framework of the novel. And it's just, I mean, all this is all the things I just said is rationalizing why I love him so much as a character. But the important thing is, when you asked me, I didn't have to think of any of these things. It was just who immediately came to mind was Pierre from War and Peace, Pierre Besuchow.
Which historical figure do you most identify with?
Yeah, I really don't. I mean, I know that's also part of the PROUST questionnaire. I'm not. It's not that I want to go for this easy thing about historical figures. There's no such thing as the historical figure or anything like that. It's more identifying with someone. I don't know how you identify with a historical figure. There are obviously many I'm really interested in, but I don't know anyone I'm identifying with. Actually, the people when we talk about identifying and history, the people I've been thinking about most in the last few years, I think since I've become a father, were the people who were young parents when in the late Weimar Republic and the early Nazi years, and then had to go into exile or send their children to exile. So this idea of there is really, really dark times coming, and there is a catastrophe coming, and you're responsible for a child. But so that has been on my mind a lot. Like how would I have reacted? How would I have dealt with that? But that's more a situation I identify with, not a concrete historical figure.
Who are your heroes in real life?
Well, I have to say, even though it's not a very original answer, the people who risk their lives to help others. Of course, now there would be like the medical workers, but then also, well, the people who work with the fire brigade, people who go into burning buildings to pull out survivors, or the people who climb on mountains to save people there. Also, because I'm honestly, I don't think I would do that. I don't think I think I'm a good enough person to not actively harm somebody, but I don't think I'm a good enough person to risk my life to save someone else I don't even know. I don't think I would do that, and so I really think people who are able to do that are very impressive.
What are your favorite names?
Don't think I have that. I mean, I think about names a lot because as a writer, you need to name characters all the time. And I usually try to get that problem out of the way. So I think the important thing about names in fiction, or also in life, when you find a name for your child, is to not get in their way. Like I was very determined when our son was born to not give him a name that would make him stand out, because I think you should try to stand out in life, but you don't want to stand out because you have a funny first name that gets called on all the time at school because it sounds weird and funny, or because your parents wanted to think of something original. It's a little bit like that with fictional characters. You don't want to give them, you don't want them to stand out by their name. So, so when you read Ernst Jünger's diaries and he thinks for pages about the vocals in the names of his characters and how they would weigh against each other and how musical they can sound, you know right away why he's a terrible novelist.
Yeah, although I'm thinking about someone like Charles Dickens, where the names are often very,
yes.
They're so unique to the character, and yet they seem to do some of the work of characterization. And I don't know if that's, in your view, if that's creative laziness or if that's...
No, it's Dickens. The thing is, Dickens did that. So he kind of invented that trick. So, and he did it extremely well. Also because you cannot quite explain how he did it. Why does Uriah sound like a bad character? It's really hard to say. It's not obvious, but it does. But then also Dickens is such a large trademark. When you do something like that as a writer, you now do something Dickensian. You do a Dickens thing.
Yeah.
So it's fine with him because he did it. He was the first to do it and he did it so well. But it's kind of, it's now it's, if you do it now, then you're just doing a Charles Dickens.
Right. Yeah, he did it first and best. So, and
also mostly with the bad characters. So Oliver Twist, that's a great name, but it's also a very unassuming name. So it's like Oliver is an unforgettable character, but not because of his name.
Right.
Well, it's quite interesting. I'm sure there are many academic studies of fictional names.
Yeah.
But everything you're saying, it makes me think of sort of this unusual names or the memorable names in fiction. It's quite interesting how much weight you want to put on a name to do the work of the story.
I mean, Thomas Mann did it a bit, but I think that's not one of his strong sides, the naming of the characters.
I'm thinking of one of the great names is Victor Frankenstein in fiction. It's sort of just some names that have become just monuments to themselves, but somehow because the story is so ingenious, the name carries the story and vice versa. But it's sort of just incredible that he comes up with this name for this.
It's a great name, but I think by now it's impossible to kind of listen to the sound of that name without the weight of the story we all know so well in the background. It's kind of impossible to feel what it was like to hear that name for the first time.
Yeah, it's probably true. Yeah. What is it that you most dislike?
That's a very general question. I think I go back to what I said before, and I say cruelty, meanness, sadism, cruelty. I think cruelty is the best term.
Mm-hmm.
What is your greatest regret?
My greatest regret, I feel like I have a lot, but then now when I try to be specific about it, it kind of all evaporates. I think anyone at a certain point in life feels life was not enough fun when you were young. And I think I have reached that point now. I should have done many more fun things when I was in my early 20s. But then I also know that's how probably everyone feels. Or I mean, maybe not the Rolling Stones, but everyone else. And so I think it's a normal part of life to feel like that, but I do feel like that.
How would you like to die?
Oh, very sudden, painless, and without seeing it coming, of course. So, which is all very unlikely when we know death statistics. All that is not usually how it happens. But if it happens, you're really privileged. Painless, fast, and best in your sleep.
What is your motto?
Yeah, I know that's part of many questionnaires. I really don't have that. I'm sorry. I can't even, I tried to think of one because someone asked me before a while ago. I really can't think of one. I'm sorry.
Yeah. We add one question to this questionnaire, Caroline and I, and we want to ask you, who would you like to hear answer these questions on our show?
Angela Merkel. And not for the obvious reason. Everyone in America admires her so much. I think part rightly so, but also part because she's a cipher. You don't really understand what's going on with her. She doesn't open up her mind to anyone. She's very, very hard to read. And that's part of her success as a politician. But that's why I would really like her answer questions like that, because there is not a single answer here where I feel like I can anticipate what she would say.
I think we may not be able to get her. Maybe we can Tracy Ullman, the British comedian who impersonates her a lot on YouTube.
Well, that would be
get her.
Yeah,
she's very funny.
Yeah, I've seen her. Yeah, she did it on an HBO show too, right?
I think so. She's been on all these different shows.
Yeah.
She's a good Angela Merkel. Probably.
But actually, you might be able to get her on the show. I mean, she has said she is not going to run again next year. So if she actually doesn't, then she might have some more time.
That's
yeah.
right.
Well, and if we can tell her that you suggested it, that might help us a little bit.
I don't know. I don't know if she's a reader. I know my friend Thomas Brusik is her favorite novelist. I know that because she said that, but I actually have no idea whether she has read any of my books. So it might not help you. I really, it's another thing about her. I really can't anticipate at all.
It's a great suggestion, though. I would love to hear her answer.
Me too.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was really fantastic. And
well, that was fun. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, it was really wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, and I think our listeners are going to be really, really excited for this. It's a treat just and for me too. I mean, to hear a writer who's alive today and whom you admire, whom I admire, talking about what makes them think, what they care about, how they work. It's just such a rare privilege to get that kind of a discussion. And I don't, that's why we're so happy to do this podcast, I think.
Yeah, and we'll put the recommendation out. So Measuring the World, the novel that probably most listeners know, and your new book, Till, Tyll, so that just come out, which is the name of a character, the character actually in the story. Do you want to say a sentence about that book? Because it takes you into an entirely different world, but it maybe is closer to where we're living now than it was 4 months ago.
Yes, it has become quite close because the plague is also something that plays a big part in the book. Yeah, it's a novel about the 30 Years' War in Europe, which was a complete meltdown of civilization and in violence and cruelty, and about the jester in these dark times. And yeah, it has become much more relevant and timely over the last few years and even over the last few months. But also, for me, there was kind of a thing about writing it in the last dark years when I was finishing it that was quite reassuring, because also it shows you that we have made a lot of progress. I mean, even with things being quite bad, they're definitely infinitely better than they were in the 17th century. So I do think that human beings learn from history, and that humanity as a whole learns from history, and that we have made a lot of progress. It can be destroyed. Progress is definitely not inevitable, but so far we haven't destroyed the progress we made. Not all of it by far.